Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes, and today we are continuing our study of Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 22, verses 14 through 17. This is the end of this section on liability for loss in the Mishpatim or covenant scroll of Exodus. So I'll begin by reading my translation of the Hebrew. Stick around to the end for a fun announcement. Verse 14, which is verse 13 in Hebrew. The Hebrew versification is different, but we're starting in verse 14 in English. If a man requests an animal from his neighbor and it is injured or dies when its owner is not with it, he shall surely make restitution. If its owner is with it, he need not make restitution. If it was rented, the rental fee comes to cover the loss. Now, we'll begin with this pair of verses because they go together, and then we'll come back to verses 16 and 17. So last week, we were talking about the giving of an animal to be safeguarded by a neighbor, and then that animal is injured or dies. And we talked about the liability and how to handle those questions of liability in cases like that. Here, the direction of obligation is reversed. Rather than bringing an animal to a neighbor for safekeeping, the neighbor requests to borrow the animal. Now, why would somebody borrow an animal? Well, in the ancient Near East, if you're a farmer and you need to plow your field, you might decide, you might not have your own ox. You might want to borrow your neighbor's ox. So instead of, will you watch this ox for me? This passage is, may I borrow your ox? So the parameters are similar to the previous laws that we've looked at, with the addition of two factors. So if you haven't watched last week's video, you'll want to go do that before watching this one. The presence of the owner and the possibility of a rental fee are the two additional factors because it's being borrowed for the sake of the borrower instead of safeguarded for the sake of the owner. So the injury or death of an animal without the owner present as a witness requires restitution. So if I borrow your ox and then that ox is injured while it's working for me, then I have to make restitution for that borrowed ox. But if I borrow an ox from you and you come along with it to work, you come along with the ox and together we plow the field and the ox is injured, then I don't have to make restitution. So presumably, if you were present with your ox, you saw that I wasn't overworking or mistreating the animal. And so if it's injured, it wasn't my fault. It was something that was just going to happen either way. If I paid to rent the animal from you, if it wasn't just a neighborly swap, then that fee covers any loss incurred, so I don't have to make restitution. So these are the particular parameters for borrowing an ox. Now, I'm never going to borrow my neighbor's ox. My neighbor doesn't have an ox. But you can easily imagine how this might translate into the borrowing of your neighbor's vehicle or the borrowing of your neighbor's tree trimming tools or saw or something. If you borrow your neighbor's chainsaw to work on your front tree and the chainsaw breaks while you're using it, then yeah, you need to make restitution. You need to replace your neighbor's chainsaw, which is one reason my husband never wants to borrow the neighbor's tools. He would rather go buy the tool because he doesn't want to be liable or have that between us and our neighbor. Now, if I borrowed the neighbor's chainsaw to work on our front tree and the neighbor came and helped me with it and the chainsaw broke while we're working on cutting off branches, then the neighbor's not going to charge me for replacing it because he was right there using it with me and he would know that it wasn't because I misused it. So there is wisdom here for neighborly behavior, even if you're not a farmer and you're not borrowing animals. I think that's interesting. Okay, so now on to the next pair of verses 16 and 17. If a young man seduces a young woman who is not betrothed and lies with her, he must pay the bride price for the woman for his act. If her father indeed refuses to give her to him, he shall still weigh silver as a bride price for the young woman. Now, undoubtedly, this passage will bother many of you, and so we have a lot to talk about here. What is going on? First of all, why am I including this law in this section? Why not include it, as some commentators do, with the following section? And the answer is because of its casuistic form. It's still following the if-then pattern. And so this is, again, in the realm of non-ideal situations. Something has happened which is not the ideal. How do we handle liability? How is it to be handled when a sexual interaction happens between a man and an unbetrothed woman? What laws govern this relationship? Now, the reason, besides the form of the law as casuistic, the other reason to include it with the previous laws is because it involves liability for a type of theft. This is not to say that the unmarried woman is the property of her father, or that she's no different than an animal being borrowed from a neighbor, but rather that he has legal responsibility for her. This law upholds the seriousness and sanctity of sexual intercourse. Casual sex was prohibited. All intercourse was to take place in and be reserved for marriage. So while the word betula in this passage sometimes refers to a virgin, the key idea here is that the woman is unmarried and not yet betrothed. To be betrothed is a legally binding status. So if a man had intercourse with a woman before he had committed to her care and well-being before God and the community, then he was not absolved of his responsibility to marry her and pay the full bride price. Furthermore, as Christopher Wright notes in his good commentary on Exodus, quote, if the father had already declined to allow his daughter to marry this particular fellow, he could not circumvent the father's will merely by having sex with her and thereby forcing the father to permit the marriage. So although he has to pay the bride price because he has accessed her sexually, he is not necessarily allowed to marry her. So he bears the responsibility without the benefits because he has tried to access the benefits without first taking responsibility. All marriages in ancient Israel were arranged between the father of the bride and the groom, and they all involved an exchange of wealth between the two families. The mohar, or bride price, was a sum of money given by the groom to the father of the bride, and it functioned like an insurance policy in the ancient Near East. The family would keep it so that the woman had a safety net if the marriage didn't work out. This marriage, the one between the man and the unbetrothed woman, was not obligatory. Her father could refuse the union if he thought it would not be best for his daughter. Presumably, her wishes would be considered. We see an example of this in Genesis 24, 57 and 58, when Abraham's servant comes to find a wife for his son, for Abraham's son Isaac, and Rebekah is the one chosen. She is consulted before being sent to marry Isaac. So consulting the woman would have been part of the process. Since the father was responsible to provide protection for his daughter and to arrange a suitable marriage, it was also his responsibility to vet the character and social standing of a man who had failed to follow proper protocol. Now that she's no longer a virgin, he has to consider the likelihood of another suitable match. This passage is sometimes misconstrued as requiring a woman to marry her rapist, but the vocabulary suggests that the man seduced her rather than forcing himself on her. As Prop notes in his commentary, the root patach refers to taking advantage of another's simplicity by deceiving them, resulting in a consensual union. The Middle Assyrian laws that are outside the Bible are much harsher. They deal with forcible rape, and they require the rape and divorce of the perpetrator's wife. So if the man who took a woman is married, then his wife is supposed to be raped in response for his rape of someone else, along with the marriage of the victim to her perpetrator. So this is a whole different ballgame in the Middle Assyrian laws. And in the case of seduction, the fornicator must pay triple the bride price, and the father of the woman has the right to give her in marriage to him or not. So that part's similar. This case in Exodus only applies to a young woman who is not betrothed. If she had already been promised to another man, the act would have been considered adultery, even if they weren't fully married yet, if they were just betrothed. And the man would be put to death for violating another man's marriage, because marriage is serious and it needs to be preserved. The covenant between husband and wife needs to be preserved. Okay, I told you if you waited till the end, I would have a fun announcement. Today is the release day for a new course that I taught online for the platform called Admirato. Admirato is a video streaming platform that has lots of wonderful courses by N.T. Wright, Esau McCulley, and there are others in the pipeline being produced right now. My course is on engaging the Torah. So if you have wished that you could come enroll at Biola University as an undergraduate, but those years are long behind you, now you have a chance to hear what I actually teach in my classes at Biola. These classes are not for credit on Admirato. They're just for personal enrichment, and you can access them either by becoming a monthly study partner, where you pay a monthly fee and then you can access any of the courses that you want, or you can buy individual courses to be able to go through it. So this is something like 4.5, 5 hours of content teaching through the Torah that you can access on their platform. I hope it's a blessing to many of you and that you enjoy a bigger overview. So compared to Torah Tuesday, Engaging the Torah course will be more of a flyover of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, seeing how they all hold together, what the big themes are. I hope you find it to be a blessing. Have a great week.